Now I know what you're thinking. Mike, what are you doing on top of a huge ladder? Well, I want to show you this. This right here is my grandfather's toolbox. And it's not moving from here, but it's a real piece of history. He used to bring this with him every day. And I mean, this thing weighs a ton without doing anything to it. But I'm going to make one. So that'll be what we'll be doing next. Oh, let's get back to the workshop. What am I going to use to make this? These here are pieces of the original fascia and soffit from my home house,
which my grandfather fitted.
So I'm going to make as much as I can out of this. Here we are back in the workshop in Galway, and the first thing I did was remove all the old fixings and nails that were still stuck in this. This is a great little jar of blade destroyers. When I had that done then, the next thing I need to do is remove all of this old paint and dirt and grime, because these were up outside the house for 30 years. And also, because of that, they're going to have a higher moisture content than I want. So I'm going to bring these inside when I have all the paint gone off them, leave them in a relatively warm room for a couple of weeks, because I don't know if I'm going to leave this toolbox in the workshop or use it as a display in the house. So with that done, let's jump forward to the future. And here we are, the future. It's terrible, the aliens have taken over. But they have managed to monetize guilt, so Ireland is now a superpower. So that's applause. So now everything is... My apologies. So now everything is dry and ready to go. Let's have a look at the plans for this. So here are the plans for this toolbox. It's based entirely off the one my grandfather made. And their sizes here is 870 wide, 370 high, and 150 deep. I'm going to have a door on it that's 220 by 45. When this folds down, I'll show you here. When that folds down, we'll have our saws in the door, so they're easily accessible. And we'll have access in here, then we'll put in some nice fittings to hold tools like the plane and our chisels and such. And up here, we'll have a divided drawer that'll allow us to store other stuff that we need, pencils, drill bits, all that kind of stuff. These plans, by the way, will be available on my website, which is coming soon, so keep your eyes open for that. And also, because I've done this in CAD, I've been able to break down a lot easier the spacings for these dovetails, because it's quite vital that when we get to a joint, we don't have a dovetail in the middle. I have that all worked out here for myself. And the same with the door. Now, the handle on this, because this is going to be quite heavy, I'm going to make in 3 pieces. So the outside pieces here will have the grain going in this direction, and this middle piece will have it going in that direction. What this means then is we essentially make a big piece of plywood, which will make this much stronger and less likely to break, whilst keeping it thin and comfortable. So the only thing to do now is to start machining down all that old stock that's been outside for decades into some usable lumber. So let's do that.
With this timber having been outside for about 30 years, there is a bit of variation in thickness and cupping and warping that happens with shrinkage. I run everything through, every piece, until I have a flat side on both faces. This means that I have material of a consistent thickness for making up the panels to make the toolbox, and it makes life a lot easier when I'm dovetailing later on. So when I had everything thicknessed here, I spent about a half an hour just working out how I was going to break this material up in order to form the panels for the toolbox. I had a limited amount of this, and it's not like I could go down to my local hardware store and get more timber that I had salvaged from my home house. So with the panels worked out and broken down, I glued them all up using biscuits to add strength. This also allows me to have the grain consistent. You can see here I'm gluing up a big panel. This is actually going to be the front of the toolbox that I will later split into two, the door and the base, and then I just clamp it up. I do this the same for the front and the sides, and the top and bottom I'm able to get out in one piece. Now just a general kind of tip when you're gluing up, you always want to have a minimum of 3 clamps on a panel like this, and if you have more you want to vary them. So up, down, up, down. This helps keep the panel flat. You can see here I used 3 on this one because it's quite small, but if I had a bigger panel I would use more. It was a goofy day. Now, in order to get the entire box out of the material I had, I did have to glue up the sides horizontally. This does lead to a slight design change, just because with the grain pattern being where it is, it wouldn't be as strong, but it's still going to be strong enough to last for decades.
Boy, did that take a long time. But we have the material we need for this. With a lot of taking pieces and gluing and making the best out of it. I knew that was going to happen. Like I said, this is something that was up on the side of a house for 30 years. It was never going to be perfect. So let's have a look at what we've got, shall we? So here I have all the material that I'm going to need to make the box itself. And we do still have some how shall we say, aesthetic flaws. That being flaws that are aesthetically pleasing, not flaws that are aesthetic. But we'll fix that. I'm going to show you how to make patches that'll cover those. A lot of them will be able to fill. But I just love the colour difference this has got over the last 30 years. So that there, all of that came out of that fascia boards that you saw. And then the material for the box, actually, I took it assuming that it was actually a piece of pine, because it was an original window board from our house, but to my surprise it's turned out to be a piece of cherry. So that's going to be really nice. It's going to give us a great contrast. So the first thing I want to do, and I'll bring in a smaller scale drawing so you can see it here, is because we're going to take this door out of the side, I want the green to match. So I've actually cut these a little bit bigger than they need to be. And I'm going to cut that door out here like that, with the shape and the little curve that'll help it close. And that means then that when we fit this all together, the grain going across here will be perfectly matched. If I used a different piece for this, or I built it in several, you wouldn't get that.
So with the sides ready, the last step before we start cutting joints is to split the front. And I just make sure that when those two pieces, the one that will be the lid and the one that will be base, join, they're perfectly tight.
Okay, so now we have our sides cut and we have the two matching, and our front is planed and sized, so it should look seamless when we're done. It's time to start working on those tricky dovetails. So I'm just roughly laying out here. This gives me an idea of the space I'm going to have inside. Obviously these are going inside like that, so that'll give me my width. This one still needs to be cut down. So now I'm going to start marking and cutting the dovetails.
And roll the montage.
few minutes for you with hopefully well edited shots and music, and several hours for me. We have the main body of this all dovetailed. So these are all hand cut, no jigs, no nothing. And you can see there now how we have the pattern unbroken here on the front and on the top. Around to the sides. Solid piece all the way up, same thing, everything lined up nice and tight. Now there's a little bit of planing and fettling. I deliberately left a bit on all of these so I could fit it all together. So yeah, we're there. So the next thing to do is to take it all apart and start covering up this kind of thing. For that, we're going to use something called a Dutchman. So I'm going to wave my magic hand. This will come apart, then we'll start working on all that kind of stuff. Then we need to start thinking about what we're going to put in here and how we're going to organise it. So, now that we have our dovetails cut, it's time to fill some of these imperfections and holes. Now the likes of these, I'm actually just going to cut little dowels out of the timber itself, plug these holes and fill them. They'll look like knots, it'll look kind of cool. But for this guy, there's a big gouge gone out of it. And this guy here, we're going to put in a little plug, also known as Dutchman. So I'm just going to put in a square plug here. That's actually a rectangle. And I'll do the same here, or maybe I might get fancy and do a dovetail. We'll see. First thing I want to do is I want to attach this to this. So we're going to go for the internet's favourite super glue and masking tape trick. We'll score around that. Then we'll remove the bulk of the depth here with the router, and then after that clean the hole up with a chisel. Okay, so we have that fairly tight. Not perfect, but nothing on this project is. So we'll just make sure to get any little hairs that are in the way out of the way. Sure it's going the whole way down. And we'll glue this in.
You want to make sure that you get this as tight as you can, because ideally here, when you cut a plug like this, you will have a glue joint on all the edges and on the face. This not only covers a hole, but it actually gives great strength.
Now do the exact same with this one. Yeah, I'll come back to you when it's done, cleaned and sanded. So here, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with these. All I'm going to need for that is a knifey. So to deal with all these screw holes, what I have is just an offcut that I've cut into a roughly square shape. And all I'm going to do is pare them down into dowels, fill all those holes, and then I'll go over with a contrasting colour filler.
Then I just repeat this process for all the nail holes that are in all the pieces. I do it from both sides, front and the back. And then, as I said, I'll just clean them off when they're dry, fill around them with a grey filler that'll match the staining that's there from the metal. And yeah, it turned out pretty cool looking.
So, we've done all the work to get our dovetails tight, and I want to make sure I don't mess that up. So what I like to do is just put a piece of masking tape across the mating parts of the dovetails when I'm sanding. This just acts as a sort of a reminder, but also a protection, so I don't come out over here, and if it does sand, it'll grab the tape and I can change the tape. I want to keep those crisp as I can. So I've set up my rather janky router table here. There will be a video at some stage of me fixing this because it's in bits. The reason I set it up is I want to put the groove in for the back here. And to do this, I'm going to have to do is one's a stop groove. You can see here on the face of the router I have two marks that mark where it wants to stop because I can't come the whole way through because I destroy my dovetails. So I'm going to start in here, pull it back to this mark. I have a mark either side of the tooth, and then push it all the way up to this other mark, and that'll create my stop groove.
And you can see me doing that here. So this is at 3 times speed. I take it very slowly, making sure that all the chips get ejected. I'll do this then for all the back edges, so the backs of the side, the top and the bottom. The groove in the bottom proceeds in almost the same way. The only difference is I'm doing what's known as a drop on here, where I'm introducing it at an angle and then pulling it back to my line. When you're doing this kind of work, be very careful to feed slowly and carefully, because the router bit can grab the piece and bust out stuff you don't want to, or in extreme cases, pull it out of your hand.
Now comes the fun part, assembling. Now for assembling dovetails, you need to make a shaped cleat. And what that cleat does is it pushes on the part of the dovetail that's pushing in. So here I have it that it lines up on these tails, so that when I clamp, it'll pull that the whole way in. If I just had a flat piece, I wouldn't pull it the whole way in and it'll get glued to it. So let's do that. So before we glue the lid together, I've just marked here for some number 10 biscuits that will be used to join these together, which gives a nice strong joint. I've added these arrows here. They're not as important on this one, but on this I want to make sure I don't accidentally drill the biscuits into the wrong sides. clamps, and I'll sound it up. It's looking pretty cool. I love this. The grain continuing across the front really makes it look quite nice. And it's the same at the sides. And that's something actually I didn't mention. Now I have the back in at the minute. I have a 9mm back. I'm going to reduce that to a 6, take a little bit of weight off this because it adds quite a lot of weight. But here at the bottom, I opted not to go for the bank of dovetails because the grain is going this way, and I was just a bit concerned that it will weaken it. So what I did was actually rebaited the bottom in, nice and tight, and I actually applied glue to half that rebate, basically forming a mortise and tenon joint, which will keep this nice together and consolidated. And then the back will also be glued in because it's plywood, or MDF, pardon me. So that'll consolidate this whole thing together to make it nice and strong. Now that this is done and tight in here, what we'll do is we'll measure inside here for our drawer and start cutting the dovetails on the drawers. And then we're getting to the fun part. We need to put a hinge on, hardware, and then work out where we're going to put in our tools and what little fixtures we need to make for them. The only other thing really that I need to do construction wise to this is I'm just going to add a strip inside here and inside the lid just to beef up that mating edge for the hinges, to make sure that we have a good amount of material around the hinges, because it's going to be swinging down. I want to have saws in this. I want to make sure that those hinges last forever. Then we'll make our handles. And this is nearly done. Turned out pretty cool. Oh, and like the lid is just sitting there perfectly. So I went and I dovetailed this. You've seen a lot of dovetailing in this video. On the front here you can see I have some very, very small dovetails, and for that you're going to need some very small chisels. This is a 3mm chisel and a very fine saw. This is just me showing off. For me, because this is my toolbox and I do what I want. But of course you could do like I've done in the back here, just do wider dovetails that allow you to get in normal size, like 10mm or 6mm. That's that hole joined up. Now I've already also shown putting the bottom in, so I won't show you doing that. I'll just come back when I have the bottom in, we'll put in these dividers, we'll mark out for our little handle. I'm still thinking on that. But yeah, we're progressing really well. So now it's time to cut our little groove for our handle. So I've shown these before. I'll just bring it down and show you on the desk here. Bench. Keep saying desk. So I have my spacings marked out here, and I want to put a little round in the corner. So I've just dropped a center punch, or center point in the corner. I'm just going to use a Forstner bit.
I was talking over while I was drilling this. So the key with this is just to take it nice and slow and have a piece at the back to stop breakout, because you want that inside corner to be as crisp as you possibly can. Then I'll just cut in between those lines using a jigsaw and sand it up then using my Dremel tool.
Hello there. Sorry, terrible habit biting my nails. So we need to line up these dividers, and because these are teensy weensy, I'm going to use the smallest dowels I have, which are these cocktail sticks. But to get the position for the hole, I'm going to use an old woodworking trick. So let's bring you down and show you. Normally I would use for dowels these guys, also known as dowel pins. You drill a hole, and that little point then will tell you where the centre is the hole on the other piece. But the old way to do this still works. So you're just going to get a panel pin, put it in roughly in the centre. That's where you're going to drill your hole. And we'll do the same here for the bottom one. Now these holes are actually just about the same size as they're going to be. Make sure they're nice and straight. Then you get a pair of clippers. You clip them off, just with a tiny bit showing. That creates your little marking point. So then I'll just bring in my piece, line everything up exactly where I want it to be, sight it, and give it a little tap tap. Now I have two holes where I'm going to put in my hole. Now I have two marks where I'm going to put in my holes, and we pull the pins out. I have a mark in the end for the other side. So I'm going to do that with 4 of these, front and back. Then we'll glue everything up.
I think you've probably seen enough glue up for one lifetime in this video. So we'll just skip forward to the piece where I'm kind of finalizing this, putting in the back dovetail, lining up those pins that I've created, Everything fits nice and smooth, and it clamps together really well and ends up making a very stiff drawer. And while that was drying, I cut my hinges in the front and the lid. Basically here, what I want to do is set the depth of my hinge to be just about a half a mil smaller than half the thickness of the hinge. This will mean that when it's fitted and all good to go, I should have about a mil of a gap in the front, which will give me enough for the hinge to function while still giving the effect that I want of it all being one piece. Now, this video is quite truncated. I'm skipping over a lot of stuff. If you'd like to see a longer form video of this, just put a comment down below and I will arrange that. I have hours and hours of content on this particular one.
Now, I won't pretend that that worked first time. It didn't. I had to do a lot of jiggery-pokery just to get the depth right so everything was nice and flush in the position. One piece of advice I would always give when you get hinges or any other ironmongery, the screws that come with them are trash. Throw them away and thank me later. So this guy, he just needs a handle. And well, I need to put in two little battens in here for the drawer, but the drawer is still, pardon me, the drawer is still drying. And like I said, this is going to live in the workshop, but I've got to solve that. So I have this, I have had this for about 10 years and I've never used it. This is a very low security lock. You could probably open it just by looking at it. But I'm going to put it in the center here just as a catch.
Now, anytime I'm fitting ironmongery like this, or even hinges, I always mark my hole using a bradawl. That creates a very small pilot and make sure that everything stays nice and aligned. Again, this is just to keep it closed. Again, like I said, you could probably open this just by looking at it. But I did get a little surprised when I tried it out. So, yeah.
Now we test. Bada bing. Bada boom. I like it a lot. And if we're so inclined, lock it. Wow, lock actually works. Now, I have my block for my handle. It's glued up, like I said, in 3 pieces, basically forming a piece of plywood of solid timber. Flattened this edge with my plane. Now I'm just going to glue on my template. Cut this baby. You can see now we have our handle roughed out. I decided it was a little bit too thick at the top, so you can see I tapered it down here. We still have a good amount of material here, there's 7 or 8 mil either side of the top. Just makes it feel a lot better in the hand. Now I'm just going to sand it, knock off all these sharp edges, and then we can put it on the toolbox. Now I filmed this, but unfortunately I didn't turn on the camera, so that's actually a misnomer. I didn't film it. But what I did was I used these dowel markers. I drilled a hole in the bottom here. Then you insert the dowel markers in where you will be putting the dowels. Line it up. And then just tap it in. The same way as we did with the pins earlier. So now I'm just going to, because I cut these dowels down, I'm just going to taper the end so they fit in better. I'll glue that in. I'll also put a mechanical fixing up through to give that handle a little bit extra strength. So in terms of construction, we're almost done here now. The last thing I want to do is put in some runners for our drawer here. And I'm simply just going to glue these in place and use some toothpicks as dowels to give a little extra strength. And in here as well, I just have 2 more patches like I did at the front. I just want to cover over some of the cracks inside, give it a little bit of extra strength. And when that's done, then we'll apply coat of finish. Well, people of woodworking land, we've got ourselves a toolbox. This actually came out really nice. I'm happy with everything. I'm happy that I made it all out of that stock I started with. So there's a story in the material and in the design for this. Now, of course, you could just leave it like this, throw your tools in, lock it up, do your work, put it away. You can store your bits, drills, pencils, pens here in this little drawer. But we're going to take it a step further. We're going to create a series of fixtures and fittings to hang our tools, quote unquote, inside this so they're easy to access and they don't get damaged. But that we'll do next week. For now, I'm just going to put a coat of Danish oil on the outside of this and on the drawer so we can see how it all looks. I won't do the inside for the moment because I want to glue little blocks and strips here to divide out my tools and create those little fixtures. That's enough of me talking. Now it's time to see how this comes out. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty epic. Now I don't know about you, but I think that's a vast improvement from this. But pay attention to what we did here, because we'll be coming back to this technique next week when we create holders for all of these tools and more that are going to go into this toolbox. So, thank you as always for staying to the end of the video. Make sure to like, share, subscribe and all that fun stuff. And do come back next week when I finish this project and get all these tools where they belong. Oh yeah, absolutely do try this at home.